On the day this story began, a quiet storm swept through the castle, and even people, as soon as they saw this man and heard what he said, simply froze in place. He approached the girl and, holding out his hand, said that she was incredibly beautiful and immediately asked her name. The man, despite the fact that he was unfamiliar with this girl, asked if she could be his. This man was Carl Chester Gran. He was 28 years old. He had a handsome appearance and a strong build. With his wonderful, sharp mind and endless talent, he was destined to become the next heir to the throne and the only direct descendant of the empire. Also, this man was unmarried. He should have married a long time ago and had at least 3 children given his status. But this did not happen. The crown prince never showed interest in any girl in his entire life, but many even thought that he never felt love, empathy, or anything else. It was almost like a curse. But to the black cat who suddenly appeared in the large banquet hall, with one furious look, he was able to win his heart. Such praise came to Naum when he thought about the black cat. The man could no longer take his eyes off him and truly fell in love with this animal. The man picked up the cat and immediately thought that he was probably hungry, so he started looking around to figure out what to feed him. Meanwhile, the animal noticed a huge fried chicken on the table not far from itself, which interested it greatly. The man noticed this. He approached the person who was cutting up the chicken for the guests and asked for a small piece for the cat. As soon as the man asked again what he meant, Carl stroked the cat and said that he had to look after him, so of course feeding him first was the most important thing. The man did not object and immediately said that of course he accepted his wishes and was ready to do everything immediately. When the piece was finally cut off, he immediately handed it to Kitty, who immediately began to eat because he was very hungry. The people who stood around and watched what was happening even burst into tears. They had never seen anything more beautiful and touching in their lives than this moment. And Carl continued to compliment this beautiful animal, who also loved him. He said that he was the most beautiful cat in the whole world. The man asked if he was ready to be his, because if he accepted this offer, he could give him absolutely everything that the cat wanted. He had a rather strange feeling inside, and he thought about how it was felt by people who fell in love at first sight, and he really liked that. Carl hugged this kitten and said that he loved him and thought that he could love him back. However, as soon as the animal heard this, it immediately became wary and jumped out of the man's hands, even though the guy had always been quite agile. The cat ran towards the exit. The man immediately followed him and asked him not to leave because he really had fallen in love with him. However, Carl was never able to catch up, despite the fact that the man even jumped from the window. It was practically impossible to do so. The next day, the brown-haired girl prepared a whole plate of food and, as usual, put it out near the entrance to the store. It was a pharmacy selling medicinal products from Rosie, and the girl was the head of it. She had already called the Crowell several times, but he still had not come, even though the food had just been prepared and even had a very appetizing aroma. The girl continued to scream loudly, calling this cat to her. She knew that something was wrong, because he would rather die than refuse food. She certainly knew that. Rosie decided to add a little spice to his food to make it more interesting, although she didn't intend to do much of it since it could even be dangerous. However, even after some time, he still did not appear. This alarmed her, of course. She really wanted to start controlling Crowell's obesity. This black cat, with whom Carl dealt at the banquet, belonged to this very girl. In fact, he was already 3 years old that year. He had grown so much that he became an excellent ball of wool. In fact, because she fed him quite well and didn't make him move much, it was difficult for him to even crawl through the cat entrance. And besides, Crowell quite often burned all his mustache because he stood next to the oven and waited for new food. When Rosie thought about it, she even became a little sad because when she first met him, he was still very little. In fact, it was a truly fateful night. This day was called the Witch's Day, and the meeting of the witches' cats was called the Fateful Night. When she was walking through the forest, she picked up a small black cat who was crying and was abandoned in the middle of the street. She felt sorry for him and decided to take him in. Rosie realized that under Luna's guidance, she had met her destiny cat, and it was truly a fateful meeting. The girl fell in love with this animal from the very beginning, despite the fact that she knew about the terrible gluttony which had a bad effect on the cat's health, she still continued to feed him quite large portions because she simply could not refuse him. However, Rosie soon realized that she shouldn't do that anymore, because the more weight he gained, the more dangerous it was for his little heart. After the death of her grandmother, she could not allow another death of a creature dear and close to her, so Rosie decided to immediately take care of his health. The girl walked around the entire apartment when he did not show up to eat. She could not understand why he was hiding and even assumed that it was because he was upset. After some time of searching, Rosie suddenly stopped in the middle of the house and became very worried. She couldn't find the Crovel and immediately ran into a special section where he was actually forbidden to be. It was very dark there, but as soon as the girl ran in, she saw some kind of light that was at the beginning. Rosie was very surprised to see him, but when she came closer, she could make out the words there were written that Croel was going to run away because he could no longer stand the food that she gave him. Rose couldn't believe that he really did this to her, because on the contrary, she was worried about his health and wanted to do the best. But in the end, he just took off and ran away. When she came closer to this fire and touched it after that, she said some spell so that this ball would show her the whole truth. In this way, the girl could find out where her dear year had been at that moment, and she saw that he was very happily enjoying himself at some noble evening with a stranger. Of course, Rose, seeing this, was horrified. She did not know what to do now and thought that he had caused a lot of problems. After the girl saw and learned everything she needed, she immediately went to get her professional clothes. Rose put on a large hat on her coat and picked up a broom. She thought that she needed to get him home as soon as possible, and then he would definitely not remain hungry any longer. At that very time, Carl continued to run and look for his love. He really felt sorry that the cat had run away, and he did not know how he could be found. A minute ago, he was holding it in his hands, and nothing foreshadowed trouble. But a moment later, it simply slipped out of his hands and ran away to an unknown destination. He ran through the streets and tried to call him, but realized the fact that he didn't even know the cat's name, so he couldn't even address him normally. However, Carl thought that if he finally found him, he would definitely tie him up so that he could never escape again. But at that moment, not far from him, he heard a female voice joyfully shouting the name of Crovel. The man became wary and immediately went in that direction. He did not understand who this voice belonged to, but he was interested to find out. Meanwhile, Rose had already managed to find her cat. She began to scold him and asked why he left her and was not going to return. At that moment, the cat began to meow. Carl, who came up and was immediately happy that he was able to find him. At the moment when he wanted to grab him, he didn't have time because Rose did it herself. She continued to communicate with the cat and said that he didn't need to do all this anymore. She was going to deal with him when they returned home. After that, the girl took him in her arms and simply disappeared. Carl didn't even have time to blink before he was blinded by a bright light. For a while, the man just stood there and didn't understand what it was all about. Soon, the bright light finally died down, and the man saw a small collar fall at his feet with the name of the Crovel written on it. At that moment, the knights immediately ran up to him, who reacted in time to the bright light. They asked the man if everything was okay with him, since they were really worried. However, Carl in the meantime only said that he was obliged to find it, after which he handed over this collar to one of the knights. The man looked at this thing in surprise and immediately asked if it really belonged to the cat he had been chasing all this time. Carl, meanwhile, started heading back to the estate and said that he was finally able to find the name of the cat. His name was Crawl, together with some girl they had just left. However, he believed that they could not have run far, so he ordered to immediately begin the search. He asked them to search every corner of the place, but when they found it, the men immediately agreed with his order and immediately went to carry it out because they knew that his word was law. Meanwhile, Carl thought that he had to find them at any cost because he already considered the Crovella his cat. He couldn't believe that he had finally found a beautiful thing that he liked, and at that very moment, he just took it and let it go. Eventually, before the sun even rose the next day, a photo of the black cat that the crown prince was looking for was hung up in the capital of the empire and placed on all the walls of the city. The man was serious about finding his cat back, while Rosie was at home having a serious conversation with her cat. She told him that this could not go on any longer, even if she had not slept all night. It was still not enough. He did not have to do this. She turned to Roval and asked if he really saw sense in all of this, even if he was not human. Meanwhile, the cat didn't listen to her at all. He was finally able to eat normally and was therefore very happy, so he played with his tail all the time for the sake of entertainment. However, when he asked for more, Rose said that he would under no circumstances get more food until he had waited for his punishment. Hearing this, Crevel became indignant. He said that this was completely impossible. She wanted him to do something until he died without hunger. This really indignant him. The girl meanwhile sat and calmly continued to drink tea, saying that in that case he should just hurry up and do what she asked him to do as quickly as possible, and then he would be able to get more. This made him incredibly angry. He asked if she was seriously telling her such nonsense. How could this issue even be resolved with such haste as she asked of him? After the Kral got angry, he decided to change his tactics. He started rubbing against her leg and asked her not to do it, but just look at him. No matter how everything turned out, he couldn't even run away as he had planned and ended up returning home. So he didn't understand at all why it was necessary to arrange all this quarrel between them. Rose immediately looked at him and said that this was the very reason she went to look for him, and also asked if in that case he really was going to just sit in the forest all that time, without even expecting that someone would come to his aid. But the crawler said that it was not so. He was just going to have a little food, and then go home, and asked if that was why she considered him a fool. Also pulling himself up, the cat said that she was his witch, and he was her cat. So he asked where he could have gone so far from her. Yes, in fact, as soon as the girl heard this, she was surprised. She was afraid that he really could just up and leave her. She also decided that she had to scold him well, so that he would know what the consequences are, and would never want to run away again. So Rosie turned to him and told him to go and finish his punishment, because she was not going to give in and leave it all unattended anyway. Cruella! This made him very angry. He called her a heartless witch and did not understand why she did this to him. As soon as the girl heard this phrase, she immediately told him in a very rude voice to shake his head. As soon as he heard this, he was very surprised and asked why she was suddenly asking him to do this. She did not answer and told him to hurry up. When Crowell continued to insist, the girl said that it was because he was the witch's cat. He was obliged to follow the instructions of their contract. As soon as he heard this, he sighed heavily and asked, "Is this really how everything was supposed to happen now?" But the girl continued to insist, and he had no choice left, so he shook his head a little. Rosie saw this and was very indignant. Then she noticed that he did not have a collar on his neck and immediately asked what he did with it. The cat felt very sad about this. He said that it just happened. He didn't lose it on purpose, so he asked her not to scold him too much. As soon as Rosie heard this, she immediately asked how this could have happened. She tried to remain as calm as possible. Crowell, in turn, said that he had actually left the collar with that man on purpose and asked him to find it. As soon as the girl heard this, she began to get even more angry, but she tried not to scream, but simply asked who he left it with. Crowell immediately said that of course it was that idiot crown prince who did this to him. The girl, hearing this, was very surprised and asked why he should suddenly start looking for it after he saw the collar. Then the roof looked away from her and said that because this man fell in love with him. The girl, having heard this, of course, did not believe it. She asked how this could have happened, but Raoul replied that he was just being charming and it just happened. The girl then asked him to be honest and asked why the sensual crown prince suddenly fell in love with him, an ordinary black cat. The animal's voice suddenly trembled, and he said that, to be honest, he wanted to know, and Rosie would be angry with him because of it. The girl immediately assured him that she wanted to listen first and then decide. And eventually, the crawler actually told her what happened then. Of course, Rosie was furious. She asked if he really said that he used a love potion on a human, and a crown prince at that. Laughing nervously, the Crowell replied that he was simply ready to give him absolutely everything he wanted. The girl, hearing this, was so indignant that she grabbed him by the fur and, lifting him up, asked if he had simply gone crazy. Rosie also asked how he could even think of using this Crowell. He replied that the potion worked well, and he believed that if everything went smoothly, they would be able to live in greater comfort. In fact, there were different types of potions in their world, the most dangerous of which was aimed at people's hearts and feelings. The human heart is incredibly fickle, uncertain, and incomprehensible, so the outcome could never be absolutely guaranteed. For some, the feeling could be indefinably sweet, but for others, it turned into an endless obsession that ended very badly. Ultimately, witches had to somehow exist with humans, and so the love potion eventually became taboo among all witches. Of course, Rosie, as soon as she heard this, was shocked. She started yelling at her cat and said that there was no antidote to this potion. She couldn't believe that he actually just went and gave this dangerous, unstable potion to the Crown Prince. She was also worried about the fact that since her grandmother had made the potion, it was definitely working, which meant that Carl was now in love with her cat. Of course, Rosie couldn't even imagine what a person with the power of the Crown Prince and his connections could do to find a simple cat. And besides, she was interested in how far the man had already gone, because this potion was probably incredibly strong, and his desires were serious. Of course, Rosie realized that the worst-case scenario for all of this would be if it turned out that the prince had taken the potion forbidden to the witch. Then it would all end very badly. The girl thought for some time about what to do, and eventually turned to Raoul and asked him to finish the cleaning that she had ordered him to do, and in the meantime, she would go and solve the problems. Of course, the kitten was very indignant. He asked her to stop and listen to him for at least a little while. In a calm voice, he said that if the Crown Prince fell in love with him, then in fact, it wouldn't be so bad in his opinion. But Rosie didn't even listen to his opinion to the end. She just walked out and slammed the door behind her, leaving him alone. She went up to the top floor of her pharmacy and started putting some potions in there. The girl knew that the prince was not an emotional person, so she very much doubted that he would be interested in being with her. She decided that he was just excited for a while, and soon it would all pass. Rosie really hoped that the Crown Prince's love had not developed into obsession. She would really like for people and witches to remain safe, and for this secret not to be revealed. However, as soon as she was about to leave the store, she saw that someone had come to visit her. As soon as the girl turned her head to the side, she saw that this person was Carl himself. The man came closer and closer to her, but did not take his gaze off her. Rose immediately understood who this man was. She immediately bowed and greeted him, but she herself was very worried. She did not know what she needed to do. She remembered that it was around midnight when she brought the bloodsuckers back, but she was amazed at his skills since he knew where she was only a few hours before. In fact, she felt like she needed to use magic or something to make all these memories and strange feelings disappear. However, since the girl did not have so much time, she did not take advantage of this, so Rose decided to remain calm and first of all, find out why he came at all. When Carl came closer to her, he did not hesitate. He immediately said that he came to take his cat. He looked the girl straight in the face and told her to give it to him. Rosie was scared because she immediately realized that he definitely didn't come for her medicine. The girl's hands even started shaking. She didn't know what she had to do, as she was afraid the Crown Prince had come to take away her dear Carl, and she didn't know how to resist him. She tried to look completely calm next to the Crown Prince and asking for his forgiveness. She said that he was probably mistaken. But at that moment, Carl suddenly pulled out of his pocket a small ribbon, which was the collar of the Crowell. Without letting the girl say another word, he said that he had confirmed his information with the person who had made the collar himself. 3 years ago, the owner of this pharmacy asked for this ribbon to have exactly that name engraved on it, so he certainly couldn't have made any mistake. The man looked quite stern and said that the consequences could be much more severe than she even imagined, so he advised her to finally give the cat back. Rosie was even more scared at that moment. She realized that she was wrong, and this man turned out to be even more cold-blooded than she thought. She understood that even if she could use magic now and run away, he would still continue to look for her and eventually find her. Carl asked her to tell him where the crawler was and what she wanted in exchange for allowing him to take it. Rose immediately said that of course she couldn't do that because Carl wasn't just her cat. He was her family, and she couldn't just give him away. The man, upon hearing this, was immediately a little surprised, but told her to continue further and argue her opinion. Hearing this, the girl was shocked. She could not believe that he actually agreed to listen to her. So without missing the opportunity, she said that even though he was of royal blood, he could not simply take a thing that had an owner. And especially considering the fact that it was not just a thing, but a family for this person. Rosie explained that family was not something that could be bought or sold, so she refused to give him the cat. As soon as Carl heard this, he got a little angry and immediately said that he had no intention of buying it at all. He just wanted it to be near her. He explained that he was ready to pay a certain price, which the girl wanted to name. He was ready to do anything just to take the crowball to himself. The girl was amazed. She did not understand why he spoke about her cat as if he were an incredible beauty. This made her wary. Without thinking twice, Rose turned to him and said that she had absolutely no idea what the difference was. She told him that she had no intention of giving it up, so she wanted him to stop it. However, Carl was also amazed and explained that if he had not intended to buy this cat, he certainly would not have told her about all this. Rosie explained that since he had already talked her out of suggesting something, she didn't see any difference from him having already made a final decision, so she decided to clarify. The man, meanwhile, ordered the knights to seize her and said that her cat had sneaked into the imperial palace the previous night, and he could order its owner to be executed on the spot for the crime committed. However, he took pity on her in a purely human way and said that this was the imperial law, but he could go against it if the girl agreed to his conditions. Rosie, hearing this, was really very scared because she understood how serious all this could be. She was silent for a while and then asked if this really meant that he was ready to become a real tyrant just because of a cat. Carl explained that he could and was going to do whatever he needed to do last night. He didn't know exactly what happened and what exactly broke in him, and he was well aware of the fact that, although it might look strange from the outside, he was really ready to go that far if it was necessary in order to get the cat back. Rose was silent for a while. She was still trying to comprehend the fact that all this was really happening, and he was not playing a joke on her. She knew that if she hadn't escaped to the witch's kingdom, there wouldn't be a single person in that world who could save her. Rosie knew that she simply had to create a cure that no witch, not even the most powerful one, had ever been able to create before. And thus she had to return the Trace Prince to normal by removing the effects of the love potion. So she said that of course he could keep Crowley close to him, but that she was going to make his terms at lunch. This condition was that along with the cat, he had to take her to himself as well, because she was not going to give away just an animal. As soon as the man heard this, he didn't think for long. He said that it was good and considered that this turn of events was simply ideal. Rosie herself was genuinely surprised as soon as she heard this, because she expected that he would stand his ground and refuse her such a favor. It sounded like he agreed to her proposal very easily, and the girl was wary because he was the crown prince. But at that moment, the man turned around and started to leave, telling her to bring the cat. They all had to head back to the palace. However, the girl suddenly stopped and said that all this should not happen so quickly. The man was sincerely surprised to hear this and immediately asked what she meant. In a worried voice, Rosie explained that she needed time to pack her things. She also needed to put up a sign that her drugstore would be closed for a while, and there were a lot of things she had to do before leaving. How could she say that he could go, and she would follow him within a few hours? However, Carl was not so simple. He moved the chair and sat down on it, saying that he could wait for her and there was no problem with that. However, he also told her not to stop talking, and Rosie was very surprised to hear this and asked what he meant. Then the man explained that she could do her job and say absolutely anything she wanted. He just wanted her to keep talking so that he could hear her voice. As soon as she heard this, she was amazed. She did not understand what kind of spell it was that had affected the prince in such a way. It was really very strange behavior for him. However, after some time, she finally did everything she needed to do, packed her things, and they went to his palace in the same carriage. Crowley was very pleased. In fact, she even liked this prince because he spoiled her, and she really loved food. The cat sat on his lap during the trip and turned to her mistress and said that since dawn, she had been grumpy and snapping at her. But in the end, she had done only the best for them. Meanwhile, Rose sat and simply smiled. She heard everything that her cat said, but the man could not do this. The girl understood that she shouldn't pretend that something was wrong, and she didn't understand at all why Crowley was blaming her, since it was she who had made all the mess. And besides, Rosie had to talk all these hours while she was getting ready without stopping. Her voice had already become hoarse, and her throat hurt a lot because the man had to hear her voice. Of course, the girl was not at all happy with this, especially considering the fact that the man was so persistent that she even had to give in a little to her princes. In fact, before they left, the chief knight who accompanied him came to His Highness the Prince. He turned to His Highness and said that, with all due respect, there were still procedures that had to be followed when introducing a commoner into the royal palace. As soon as the man heard this, she looked at him sideways and said that he could have done this after they left, so he did not understand at all what the problem was. However, the man said that the correct procedure was quite long and very important. But the guy quickly shut up because he saw the prince's very angry look. The man understood that in such situations, it was best to simply remain silent and not show that he was afraid. After a short silence between the two of them, the guy simply bowed and said that he would carry out his order without question. After a short silence between the two of them, the man suddenly asked the girl if there was any way to learn to understand what the cat was saying. As soon as Rosie heard this, she panicked a little, but she immediately replied that it was of course impossible. The man was sincerely disappointed in this and, sighing heavily, said that it was shameful. While they were driving, Carl also asked what kind of food the cat that belonged to him now liked. The girl thought about the answer to this question for a while, and then said that she didn't think she liked anything in particular. She did not give up her attempts to transfer her cat to the right diet, and said that boiled broccoli and cabbage were most likely her favorite dishes because she ate them very often and in large quantities. As soon as Crowley heard this, she immediately jumped on her mistress's feet and asked what she was saying and why she lied about something like that. The girl just smiled and tried to calm her cat down and said that she really liked these dishes so much that she couldn't even contain herself as soon as she heard their name. The cat at that moment was incredibly unhappy with her behavior because she continued to lie to him right in the face, and Crowley was hoping for a happy and delicious life. After a short silence, Carl suddenly said that it looked the opposite of love, and he was not sure that Crowley liked these products. The girl continued to smile and said that this was his first time in contact with a cat. This meant that he was not aware that each animal showed its emotions differently. Rosie explained that she had been living on the roof for quite a long time, and therefore she knew better what her cat's preferences and habits were. Then suddenly, using her magic, she touched the top of the cat's head and told them to have a frank talk. The girl leaned closer to her and asked if it was true that she loved broccoli and cabbage the most. Because Rosie had an effect on the cat with her magic, she immediately meowed, even though she didn't want to. As soon as Carl noticed this, he became wary and said that in any case, he would ask the chef to prepare these dishes especially for her. The girl immediately thanked him and said that it was very generous of him, and after that, she decided that life with him could be even easier than she had assumed. Rosie was very happy that she could take advantage of this wonderful opportunity to improve Crowley's nutrition and make her lose some weight. Of course, she still needed to return the crown prince to normal so that he wouldn't go crazy over her cat. But that wasn't a quick task. Some time passed from that moment, and now they finally got to his house. The man came out first and was immediately met by many maids. As soon as Rosie and Crowley saw this beautiful castle from the window, they were amazed, and they were even more surprised by the subordinates who lined up around. The cat immediately thought that all these people should serve her, and was very happy because this meant that she was now in very good hands. As soon as Carl saw how Crowley meowed and began to scratch the glass, he smiled and said that she looked very pleased, which made him happy. He took the animal in his arms and after that went out with her, where he was immediately met by the knight who accompanied them. Before leaving towards the estate, he turned back to the carriage and welcomed her into his home. Pointing back with his hand, he said that everything she saw with her own eyes belonged to him, and already turning to Crowley, he said that now it was her domain too. How many immediately meowed with happiness. She was truly delighted with what she saw and was very happy. After this, the maid who was his main one turned to the man and asked if the man was really not feeling very well. It was Lady Aldwin, she was a countess, and the head of all the maids. The man explained that there was nothing wrong with that, the animal was now his cat, so he wanted her to be as close to him as possible all the time. Baron Lafitte was the head of the royal servants. As soon as he heard this, of course, he was indignant, because he did not expect such a thing. Carl, meanwhile, went to his office and said that this person who came with him was supposed to take care of the cat. If she said that the cat needed something, then they were supposed to make sure that everything was provided. The maid was about to object to him, but she did not have time, because the butler spoke up and said that he believed that there was no need to allocate a huge whole room for just one small cat. He thought it was completely irrational, but Carl replied that it was not their problem at all. He said that if she didn't have a room, she couldn't think of the place as her home, so Crowley had to have her own place. Before he gave the word to his servants, the man made it clear to them that whatever they said didn't matter anyway, so he asked them to just leave. As soon as the servants were outside the door, the butler sighed heavily and asked how this palace continued to function at all with such a turn of events. The maid even asked if they should have informed His Majesty about this, since it was quite a serious problem. However, the man explained that this certainly could not help. She knew His Majesty's character very well, so even attempts were useless in that case. Then Lady Aldwin asked what they were supposed to do. The butler immediately said that, firstly, they had to keep everyone's mouths tightly shut. They couldn't allow rumors to spread that someone had entered the Crown Princess's chamber. And in a quieter voice, he said that it was also necessary to closely monitor the new girl who had arrived at the palace. He believed that since she had come to this place voluntarily, sooner or later she would definitely reveal her true intentions. The maid smiled happily and said that he could have entrusted her with this. She was definitely going to keep an eye on this lady and, if necessary, let her know who was in charge. Meanwhile, Rose had already arrived at the room that was allocated to them, and the girl was amazed by the large scale of the royal palace. She really didn't expect this. Several hours had passed since then, and Crowley became very bored, so she jumped off the soft pillow on which she had been sitting all that time. Stretching her little back, she said that some time ago he had been hovering over her and was even ready to give her his liver if necessary. But now he was completely ignoring her. The cat even wondered if she was really like a caught fish, which was now completely unimportant. She turned to her mistress and asked what would happen next, if he had treated her like that at the first stage of their acquaintance, and she also really hoped that he would not make her starve. Rose immediately said that since she was worried, she should have thought about what she did in the first place. All this was because of the mess she created, so she should now understand the consequences of her actions. Crowley immediately said that if the owner had fed her normally the first time, then none of this would have happened, so it certainly wasn't her fault. Yes, the girl got angry at the animal, and, lifting it up, said that this did not at all justify the terrible action she had done with her grandmother's potion. Crowley smiled and said that perhaps she should have just locked the potion up better if it was so dangerous. Yes, Rosie asked the cat not to twist the facts that were on the face. He should have been perfectly aware of the fact why this potion was banned in the first place. She screamed, "Yes, Crowley," and said that many people died after drinking this love potion, and that is why they made an alliance with humans and agreed to never make such potions again. The cat didn't care at all about this. She said that it was an ancient story, and besides, the man who had drunk this potion a long time ago didn't look dead at all. Rosie finally put the animal down and said that in fact, if he died, it would be much easier for them and even a great success. As soon as Crowley heard this, she immediately asked what she meant, and the girl explained that even the fact that the kitten was in the imperial palace could lead to the two of them being executed, and she asked her to imagine what would happen if they all found out that he had drunk a forbidden potion, which was also made by a witch. Of course, this would be a very tragic story, and all people would be angry at the witches and would hunt them. Crowley, as soon as he heard this, immediately understood that it was really quite serious. But Rosie continued to speak and said that as a pharmacist, he was responsible for the medicine that was sold and produced. Since the cat came to this place, both her life and Crowley's were at great risk. They talked to each other for a while longer and argued very heatedly because Rosie tried to prove that she was right and tell her to never do that again. But soon the door to their room opened and several maids entered, including the head maid. The woman turned to Rose and her cat and told them to go after her because she had to take them to the right room. The girl was a little surprised at first, but immediately taking her things, she stood up because she thought that the room they were in was already theirs. And only at that moment, the maid suddenly noticed the broom in her hands and immediately asked what it was needed for. The maid also asked if Rosie had already brought it, since she thought that there might be a broom in the royal palace. And besides, she didn't understand at all how the girl could carry this thing in the prince's room. It was definitely unacceptable and incredibly rude on her part. As soon as Rosie heard this, she was shocked and immediately said that this was not what she thought. Another fold came closer to her and immediately said that it would be best for the girl to quietly and without arguing give up her broom. And she asked if the girl did not understand at all what could happen to those who argued with the head servant. Another maid agreed with her and asked why she had come to the palace at all if she simply did not know her place. It was stupid in her opinion. At that moment, Crowley immediately felt some kind of evil energy coming from them and hissed. Rosie, meanwhile, turned to her and told her to stay where she was because the cat was already ready to attack if anything happened. Then she turned to the head maid and immediately said that this was not an ordinary cleaning broom at all. As soon as the maid heard this, she was very surprised and asked what the girl meant in that case. Rosie, meanwhile, explained that it was like a 5 that cats used to sharpen their claws because she couldn't stand the furniture being shabby, so she took it with her. Then Crowley, in order to demonstrate, went up to the broom and began to sharpen her claws on it. And the girl, meanwhile, explained to the maids that this was how they sharpened and trimmed their claws. After that, smiling, she said that if you don't have any similar things, then the cat could share absolutely everything around, and if it were an expensive thing, that would be clearly unpleasant. So after the maid heard this, she said that it was all terrible. It was a very disrespectful act on the part of the cats, and it was the first time she had ever heard of anything like this, that it was, after all, an animal instinct, so they certainly couldn't do anything about it. Then the servant looked down at how Crowley was greedily tearing apart this broom and was very afraid that something like this could happen to the expensive furniture that was in the palace. So, after coughing, she said that she thought she could allow him to take this strange thing with him, because nothing could be done about it. However, she also said that the girl should never have allowed His Majesty the Crown Prince to see this at all, so she had to be careful about such things. She immediately bowed and thanked the headmaid for this, and said that she would definitely keep an eye on everything. After that, the girl noticed the evil looks of the other maids and realized that all the other people definitely did not treat them kindly. Before they went to the room, the maid also told the girl that if even one piece of furniture in the Crown Prince's room were to be stained, she would be severely punished. Rosie, upon hearing this, was of course a little surprised, but said that they were definitely ready to do everything possible to prevent this from happening. Meanwhile, Crowley immediately followed her and asked why everyone in this estate was so scary and unfriendly. He even didn't want to be there anymore. However, Rosie was not at all surprised by this, because she had expected exactly this kind of attitude, so the girl had to create an antidote as quickly as possible. After some time, a knight came to Carl, and the man asked him to assign several guards to the cat. He also asked that these guards watch from behind the girl, of course, the knight. As soon as he heard this, was amazed because he did not expect such a thing. He explained that if they were to appoint knights for a girl with such a low social status, then all sorts of rumors would immediately start to spread. But Carl said that everything was fine. These knights were not there to protect them, but on the contrary, to watch over them. As soon as the guy heard this, he was very surprised. But Carl asked if the two of them didn't seem suspicious to them. The man asked for forgiveness from His Highness and said that he did not dare to know his master's thoughts and express his own, so he was ready to simply carry out his orders, and that's all. Carl replied that he would like to express himself differently and asked if he really looked and seemed crazy to them. The man immediately said that this was not the case at all. The guy was exactly the same as always, and he did not even dare to assume that something had changed. Then the prince replied that, with one exception, he felt that he was going crazy, and so he decided to ask whether it was very noticeable from the outside. The man said that it was all because her cat was too cute and beautiful, and he simply couldn't help but feel some kind of special attraction to this animal. Of course, this worried him a lot, but what he was most suspicious of was the girl. The first time, as soon as he heard her voice, a chill ran through his entire body. His heart even stopped for a second. Her voice was too beautiful, so he made her talk all the time so that he could listen to it as often as possible. This voice was more beautiful than anything he had ever heard, so the man did not understand at all what was happening to him, and this frightened him very much. Carl said that it was not the same case as with the cat. He was attracted not by her appearance, but by her seemingly magical voice. As soon as the knight heard this, he was amazed. He thought that His Highness never paid attention to appearance. The man had a rather acute hearing from birth, and for this reason, voices and various sounds had a special effect on him. God could discern even the slightest difference, and never forgot the voice he had heard even once. Some people even had the impression that he recognized them not by their faces, but by their voices. Carl at that moment sighed heavily and said that most likely this was the reason why the cat looked so beautiful to him. In fact, he had seen cats before, but they all did not look like Crowley. This cat was absolutely unique. She was magnificent, that he couldn't even take his eyes off her, and he wanted to stroke her furry body every minute. It was the only creature in the world that seemed beautiful to him, and it lived simply in some pharmacy. Here, suddenly, even Carlo began to think that perhaps some secret potion that they were making there could have had such an effect on him. Then he got down to business again and asked the knight to choose only humble people who could look after these two. The man immediately bowed and said that he understood everything and that he was immediately ready to carry out his order. At that very time, Rosie had already been brought into their new room from the roof, and as soon as the girl saw this luxury, she was amazed. She froze in place and could not say anything, and most importantly, the maid said that this was not the place where she would ever be allowed to perform. However, by some ridiculous coincidence, she was simply lucky to end up there, and she let her into this room only because of the order of His Highness. On her own, she would definitely not have allowed such a thing to happen. However, the maid said that the girl was not to touch or use anything in that room under any circumstances. However, since His Highness insisted that she live there, the girl allowed her to spend the night. She gave her a pillow with a small blanket and told her to sleep on the floor and under no circumstances even touch the bed. He was serious and even suggested that the girl inform the crown prince about this woman and kick her out of the estate altogether. One cow here whispered to him and said that there were customs in the palace that he certainly could not understand, so she suggested that he not rush to his conclusions. And besides, manners were very important in that place, so the girl bowed and said that she understood everything and thanked her for the room. Before leaving, the headmaid also asked the girl to hide the luggage where no one would see it, and they would never be able to know exactly when His Highness arrived, so everything had to be perfect. The maid also said that His Highness might need a bath during the meal, so she asked that he be bathed and combed beforehand. As soon as the cat heard about the bath, he got very angry and immediately began to break free. But Raleigh held him tightly and said that she understood everything, and also asked where Vanna was. The maid pointed to her somewhere and said that she could use that room specifically since it was the first day. So she had to be especially careful in taking care of this cat, because even a small mistake should not be allowed. The girl immediately said that she would definitely do everything in her power, after which the maid simply turned around and left, leaving her alone. Crowley Belko looked at his mistress and asked if she really needed to take the shroud, since it hadn't even been a week since the last time. But the girl replied that in fact, this was not the case. That day, it had been 6 months since the last swim, so it was really necessary. Crowley began to get indignant and told her not to lie, because it couldn't be true. He clearly remembered how she had bathed him just recently. The girl asked that the cat not be picky and still behave himself, saying that he wanted to live in the palace, in which case they both had to follow the rules. Rosie went to the next room to buy a cat, but she remembered that the side room was located far from the main palace. This meant that she wouldn't have to worry about anyone seeing her washing her cat. Well, as soon as the girl got into the bathroom, she was amazed. And all because, when she opened the door, she saw the completely naked crown prince, who was taking a bath at that moment. In fact, sometime before the girl arrived, he began to undress in order to take a bath. A knight was next to him and said that if the headmaid found out that he used this place, she would definitely not be delighted. Of course, the knight did not like at all that the man was taking a bath in this place again, since the main servant always insisted that he take advantage of his status and always take a bath in the main palace. However, Carl, continuing to take off his clothes, said that this was completely expected, so there was nothing terrible. His assistant was not at all thrilled about this, because the water had not even been heated in advance, so it was completely ice cold. But the man did not care about this, and he calmly sat down. He simply assumed that Carl might have been so immersed in his thoughts that he didn't even notice anything else around him. This was a completely obvious assumption. Then the knight bowed and said that he would go to heat water for him. The man did not give birth to you and simply sent him away. And when the guy was left alone, he suddenly looked at the water and saw something strange that alerted him. This water was cold, but he did not feel it because he was really immersed in his many thoughts. He then was about the fact that all living creatures that he had seen up to that day were like ugly creatures. But Crowley, his cat, was completely different. He was a delightful creature that a man could look at forever. As soon as he remembered how at that ball he hugged this beautiful kitten and stroked its soft fur, a smile immediately appeared on his face. Because this had never happened to the man before, he did not understand what it was. However, he knew for sure that he would never want to let this creature go from himself. And for some unknown reason, he also wanted to see this girl next to him. He also thought that if she needed something, then she herself should come to him, and he would gladly accept it. However, at that moment, he suddenly heard her voice. As well as the meowing of the cat, Rosie yelled at him and said that they needed to take a bath. So this was not even discussed. Rosie didn't notice the man until the very end, who was already sitting in the bathroom. She started looking for soap because she didn't see it, and also wondered if she should have asked for it in advance, because maybe they didn't have it in a prominent place. However, at that moment, she suddenly heard some strange sounds behind her, and as soon as she turned her head, she saw the crown prince in front of her, which surprised her greatly. She did not understand why His Majesty the Crown Prince could be at such a time, and even in the bath in the annex. Rosie came to her senses quite quickly, and immediately closed her eyes and asked him for forgiveness for disturbing her and for the intrusion. She said that she would immediately find a new bath so as not to disturb him, but the man waved his hand and said that there was no need at all. He asked if she hadn't come to bathe Crowell. The girl immediately replied that that was correct. Then the man replied that she should get started. Prose, hearing this, became even more embarrassed. She did not understand how she should have acted like this, since he was completely naked at that moment, and she thought that it was definitely wrong. But she knew she had to think rationally. He was the crown prince, so he always had someone serving him, so he was used to people, even though he was completely naked in the bathroom. So, sighing heavily, the girl asked if he had finished swimming yet. The man replied that he had planned to do so. However, then he suddenly smiled and said that perhaps it would be a good idea to even learn how to bathe a cat, because perhaps this knowledge could be useful to him in the future. Prose was very upset at that moment, because it meant that he was going to continue watching her bathe the cat. But at the same time, he was going to continue to be in the bathroom completely naked. After a short silence, she said that in reality, this procedure was not much different from bathing a person. At that moment, she began to dip the crawler into the water and said that you just need to thoroughly wet the wool, lather it with soap, and rinse it, and then dry it thoroughly with a towel and dry it. As soon as Crowell found himself in the water, he was simply in shock because the water was icy. He began to break away from the girl's friends and asked her if she was trying to kill him. Soon the girl lost control over him, and the cat ran straight towards the man, and his claws were quite sharp. Rosie knew she had to do something, so she thought for a moment and jumped into the water, only to be surprised by the fact that the water was really just icy cold, and she couldn't understand how a man could even be there. She tried to find the blood with her hands, when suddenly Carl took her by the hands and lifted her out of the water because he thought she was suffocating there. The girl looked at him with a surprised look and felt rather awkward, because she didn't think that in the end she would have to be saved. Carl, meanwhile, sat her down on the edge of the bathtub and immediately asked if everything was okay with her. The girl immediately asked where the Crover was. The car at that moment pointed back and said that it was right behind her. Carl explained that the first thing she did was jump out, but Rosie simply didn't see it and so jumped into the water. The cat, meanwhile, was trying to shake off the wet fur and asked, did the girl really want her to die, since it almost happened? The man said that Crowley looked fine, but he asked the girl to never do that again because it could end badly for her. Rose asked him for forgiveness, but she herself did not understand what she was doing at all. She knew that she did not know how to swim, but for some reason she still took it and jumped. This was not at all like her. Carl said that she was probably very cold, so he told her to take off her wet clothes because it could cause her discomfort since her whole body was shaking from the cold. As soon as the girl heard this, she immediately asked him what he meant, and Carl explained that if she was worried that he could do something to her, then she shouldn't have. To make her feel more comfortable, he moved a little further away from her and said that he didn't have even the slightest desire to do anything, so she didn't have to worry. The girl didn't have time to answer when he suddenly reached for her dress and began to quickly take it off. Rose immediately touched his hand and asked him to stop for at least a minute. The man immediately smiled and asked if such a frightened voice could also sound wonderful. The girl did not understand at all what he was talking about, so she asked what he meant. The man said that it was all strange. She was so beautiful, but even this was his scarecrow. He also said that when he heard her voice, nothing else mattered to him, and it was some new feeling for him, so he decided to share it with her. As soon as Rosie heard this, she immediately realized that her ancestral ties to the witch could make her voice sound beautiful to human ears. But she knew that this was already beyond what was called simply a good voice. But the girl at that moment did not even control his hearing in any way. It was very sensitive, and it was for this reason that she assumed that he reacted this way to her voice. Carl continued to take off her dress and said that if it was really bothering her, he would advise her to close her eyes so she wouldn't think it was him doing it. Rose understood that he would not leave her alone so easily, so she took his advice and closed her eyes. Then the man took off her top dress. After that, I continued to smile. He said that it could stop more dangerously. Even her awkward moans sounded very good after everything that happened. As soon as she heard this, she immediately began to cover her body with her hands. She was afraid that she could somehow seduce this man, although she did not want this at all. Rose also suggested that most likely this situation could not only be due to sensitive hearing, but more due to a matter of his personal taste. The man reached towards her body to remove her corset, but the girl stopped him and asked him to stop. Rosie's face turned very red. She said that this time it would be better for him to just unbutton the buttons, and she would do the rest herself, because it was too much for her. The man sighed heavily and asked her to tell him where these buttons were. He closed his eyes, and the girl moved his hands so that he would not touch her where he shouldn't. Rosie understood that the crown prince was remarkably indifferent to others, which meant that he had no intention of treating anyone as special. For this reason, she assumed that most likely he just wanted to resolve this situation, and that's all. And it was for this reason that he behaved quite openly, and to some extent, impudently. She had never experienced such discomfort and embarrassment before, but she assumed that because he was cold-blooded, he didn't even notice it, and for this reason, Rosie decided to take all her will into a fist and do what was necessary. Then she directed his hand to the buttons on her corset and said that they were there. The man immediately smiled happily and began to stretch it, and all this time, Rosie tried to force herself not to think about it because he was just a person who unbuttoned her buttons, and that's all. She even decided that she could imagine that he had simply joined in with Raoul. It was much easier for her that way. Then the girl began to hum some melody because she thought that this way even the crown prince could distract himself. Then suddenly he stopped and said that if she continued to move, he definitely would not be able to keep the promise he had made. In fact, this singing had quite a strong effect on him, and he said that if she continued like this, he would definitely have broken the promise where he said that he was not going to touch her. Rosie, hearing this, was immediately very scared and did not understand whether the person standing in front of her was the one who was called emotionless. because now he was completely different. She was aware of the fact that the crown prince had definitely fallen in love with her cat. But she didn't understand why some of the sparkles were flying towards her too. Some time passed since then. Rosie completely took off her wet clothes and covered her body with a dry towel in order to warm up a little. The man, meanwhile, moved to another part of the bathroom and touched the next towel and asked if he could open his eyes yet. After he handed her another long towel, Rosie immediately covered herself and said that he could do it. When Carl opened his eyes and began to stare intently at the girl, Rosie immediately began to think that something was wrong. She thought that something other than her grandmother's potion was affecting him, and this made her wary. But before they could say another word to each other, the knight suddenly entered the bathroom, and, as soon as he saw them together, he immediately blushed with embarrassment. He asked in a voice trembling with fear if he had disturbed them, but as soon as he saw Carl's icy, angry gaze, he immediately fell silent. The prince, meanwhile, adjusting his hair, sighed heavily and said that he was aware of the fact that this certainly could not happen. So such stupid questions were completely inappropriate. He started to get out of his bath and said that the water had already warmed up, so he informed the girl that she could already buy some Crovel. While he was getting out of the bathroom, he asked the knight to bring women's clothing. The man bowed and immediately said that he understood everything and immediately went to carry out the order. In fact, he was only happy to leave this very unstable emotional room and at least catch his breath a little after what he had seen. In fact, Rosie tried to behave quite quietly, but she was still embarrassed. The man handed her another warm towel, which made her happy because she was really cold. After some time, Carl was already fully dressed in his clothes, and as soon as she looked at him, she was a little surprised. The man did all this quite calmly and quickly, and this meant that he was already used to dressing himself, which was completely unnatural given his status. And besides, she thought about the fact that it was rather strange that he chose cold water in a distant bathroom. Rosie realized the fact that no matter what she knew about the crown prince, he still had some hidden secret that no one else knew. Before leaving, Carl looked at the cat and noticed that it kept pushing itself out. He assumed that she didn't like baths very much. The girl sighed heavily and said that, in fact, this was not true, because on the contrary, she absolutely loved taking a bath and could sit there for hours. Rose also smiled and said that even now, she wanted to take a bath as soon as possible. But she was disappointed because the girl was wearing only a towel and could not help her with this. Of course, this was all untrue, and the cat even began to scratch her in protest, and also scolded her for lying again. And Rosie ignored all this, and Carl, meanwhile, happily rolled up his sleeves and asked the girl to let him do it. He just wanted to learn how to do it, and practice is the best part of learning. As soon as she heard this, you were very surprised, and asked His Highness if he really wanted to do this on his own. The man said that, of course it was. He thought it would even be a pleasant activity for him, as well as unforgettable feelings. As soon as Rosie heard this, she realized that his symptoms and side effects from the love potion were becoming more and more severe every day, and this was alarming her. Then she told the prince that he had to take the roof and put it in warm water. But he had to be careful because the water should not get into her ears. It could be very dangerous. Despite all the things the cat tried to get out of the way and scratched and hissed, the man still managed to pick her up and said that he had completed the first part. Of course, Crowley immediately prepared his claws to scratch him all over, because he was not going to leave it all like that, since it hurt his pride. But in a whisper, Rosie reminded him that he had to remain motionless, because if even one scratch appeared on the body of the high-ranking crown prince, then this would already be enough to execute both of them.